16 documents bear my signature. I signed one. The other 15 moved $38 million. Every curve, every slant of my name, identical. 15 times identical. No hand does that. I trained my signature for years, made every stroke deliberate. Someone captured all of it and used it without me in the room. 3 years. Every authorization traced back to one locked desk in one private office. My father-in-law's. I spent 6 years earning my place in that family. He spent 3 of them working without me. Half of you will call him a criminal. The rest will say I was the rubber stamp before a real one existed. Stay. See which you become. The call had ended 40 seconds ago. The document was still on my screen. I stared at my own name at the bottom of the page, the loop on the capital A in Estrella, the habit I'd carried since I was 12 because my mother said it had character. That loop was on this authorization. Perfect. On a $4.2 million distribution I had never seen. I called the trustee back. "The distribution request," I said. "Who submitted it?" His answer came careful, measured, the voice of a man who manages other people's fortunes and weighs every syllable accordingly. "It came through the family office, Mrs. Southcott, standard channel. Your signature was on the authorization." "Who hand-delivered it? Whose desk did it cross before yours?" "I'd need to check the submission log. These requests typically route through the principal's office." The principal's office. Hadrian's office. My father-in-law had built every entity I was signatory on, ran this family's empire for 35 years before I existed in his world, and every document that carried my name apparently routed through his desk first. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still in the chair Hadrian had picked out for my office, Italian leather, hand-stitched, presented my first week like a housewarming gift. Took me 3 years to learn that in this family, furniture is how they assign your position. I pulled up the original authorization I'd signed 3 years before, still in my files because I keep everything, placed it beside the forgery on my screen. Both signatures looked like mine, but the original had a slight upward drift on the final letter, natural, the way a hand lifts when it's finishing a word. The new one didn't drift. Every stroke level, controlled, as if someone had taken my handwriting and corrected it. A copy would carry the drift. A hand forgery would carry errors. This had neither. I should tell you who I was in that moment. Not what I found, who I was. I was the woman who almost closed the laptop, who nearly went downstairs, mentioned it to Hadrian over dinner, casually, the way you'd mention a billing error, and let him handle it, because that's what I did in this family. I accommodated, I deferred, I trusted the system because I wanted to deserve being inside it. 6 years of marriage, 3 years as signatory, and my first instinct when I found my own signature on a $4 million document I'd never touched was to not make trouble. That instinct is exactly what gave them 3 years. I opened my browser and searched for forensic litigation attorneys. The next morning, I was sitting across from a woman who handled evidence the way surgeons handled tissue, edges only. Nothing contaminated. Bryony Keld, forensic litigation attorney specializing in trust fraud and document authentication. I found her through a referral chain that burned 4 phone calls and 1 night where I didn't sleep at all. Her office was everything the Southcott estate wasn't. Glass walls, steel fixtures, cool white light that didn't flatter anything. The kind of space where family mythology dies on contact with evidence. She studied the authorization for a long time. Paper stock first, then formatting, then the signature itself. She held the page up to the overhead light, angling it, examining something in the ink I couldn't see from across the table. Her glassing glasses migrated from her nose to the top of her head. Then she looked at me. "Have you told anyone in the family?" "No." Quiet, deliberate. "Good. Don't." 2 words that rearranged the room. This wasn't a consultation anymore. Bryony had looked at one document for 3 minutes and already understood something I was still catching up to, that the threat wasn't somewhere out there. It was inside the house I'd been living in. Then she asked the question that cracked the scope open. "How many entities are you signatory on?" I opened my mouth and realized I had never tallied them, not once in 3 years. The family trust, 2 LLCs, Southcott Capital Partners, Southcott Holdings West, the real estate portfolio entity, 2 holding companies for the private equity arm. I counted on my fingers. 6. 6 entities, 6 surfaces where the same forgery could exist. Bryony's pen tapped the desk once, hard. "I need every document bearing your signature from all 6 entities. Past 3 years, originals where possible, certified copies where not." "All of them?" She leaned forward, maybe 2 inches. I'd learned later that the lean was Bryony's tell. It meant she'd found the thread. Her voice dropped, not for drama, for precision. "A single perfect replication of a signatory's exact handwriting doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen once. If someone built this capability, they built it to use repeatedly." Built, not copied, not forged, built. Like infrastructure, like a system with a purpose and a schedule. I sat in that glass office under light that hid nothing and felt the first real crack, not in the case, in me. In the story I'd told myself for 6 years about what it meant to carry the Southcott name. Because if Bryony was right, this wasn't a mistake or a shortcut. This was architecture, and architecture requires an architect. I knew who built everything in my family. He'd been building for 35 years. I signed the retainer agreement, pen to paper. My real signature, the version with the upward drift, the human version, the one that takes a hand. I noticed that my hand didn't shake, and I hated that it didn't. Shaking would have felt honest. My hand was steady because I'd spent 6 years training it to perform steadiness inside rooms that were never mine. They came in batches. Thursday afternoon, 3 entities reported. Friday morning, 2 more. By Friday at noon, Bryony's long glass conference table looked like a crime scene mapped in paper. 16 documents, laid flat, chronological, left to right, each one bearing my signature at the bottom, dark blue ink, authorization block, my name above my title. Bryony stood at one end, I stood at the other, and I walked the line. The first document on the left, I stopped. My hand went to the edge of the page before I could think about it. I knew this one. I knew the paper, the date, the weight of the pen in my hand that afternoon. This was the original, the signatory authorization I'd signed 3 years ago, the day they made me signatory on the family trust and its entities. I remembered that room, Hadrian's office at the estate, the dark wood, the portraits behind him, the brass lamp pooling gold across his desk like the room was lit by money. He stood behind the desk, extended his hand, said, and I remember the exact words because I replayed them for months afterward like a song I wanted to memorize. "Welcome to the family's work." I shook his hand. I smiled. I felt like I'd finally crossed a threshold I'd been standing at for 3 years of marriage, like the signatory role wasn't just administrative, like it meant they trusted me, like I was inside now. He needed my signature on file. The lawyers had told him a second signatory was required for compliance. Restructured trust, new regulations, estate planning requirements. That's what the position was, a legal checkbox. But he dressed it as belonging, and I wore it like a gift because I wanted it to be one. That was the last document my hand actually touched. I moved down the line, one step, another, 15 more pages, my signature on each, same ink color, same loops, same slant, same deliberate upward drag on every T. 15 times my name had authorized something I'd never seen, never reviewed, never heard of. 11 of them were financial transfer authorizations. I read the amounts and did the math in my head the way you do when you don't want the number to be real. You add it once, then you add it again, then you stand there hoping arithmetic works differently the third time. $38 million. Distributions, entity-to-entity transfers, investment disbursements, all routed through accounts I was supposed to oversee. I checked the dates. The first forged document was dated 11 days after I signed the original authorization. 11 days! Whoever did this didn't wait, didn't test it, didn't ease into it. They had the system ready. They were waiting for my real signature so they could start using the copy. 3 years, my entire tenure, there was never a period, not a month, not a quarter, where my authority was actually mine. From the day I signed that original, someone was using my name without my hand. I'd been overseeing entities that were already running without me. I stood at the end of the table, 16 documents behind me, one real, 15 manufactured, and the number that stayed, the one I couldn't stop calculating, wasn't 38 million, it was 11. 11 days. That's how long it took for someone to decide my actual consent was optional. Bryony was quiet. She'd let me walk the full line without interrupting. When I turned around, her pen was on the table. The glasses were on top of her head. She was watching me the way I imagine surgeons watch families in waiting rooms with information they haven't delivered yet. "There's something else," she said. I looked at the table, 16 documents. I'd counted 11 financial transfers, 15 total forgeries. The math left 4 documents I hadn't categorized. 4 of those aren't transfers, Bryony said. Her voice was even, clinical, but the pen was on the table. She'd put it down. "They're a different kind of document entirely. I need another day to confirm what they are and what they mean for you specifically." She didn't tell me more. She didn't have to. The way she said "for you specifically," not for the trust, not for the entities, for me, told me those 4 documents weren't about money. I drove back to the estate that evening, past the gates, up the long drive, past the hedgerows that cost $12,000 a year. I know because I saw the landscaping invoice once and thought it was a mistake. Through the front entrance of a house I'd lived in for 6 years and never once thought of as someone else's architecture. Stellan was in the kitchen, white shirt, sleeves rolled, pouring wine. He looked up and smiled, the easy smile, the one that used to make me feel like the luckiest woman in any room. He asked about my day. "Long," I said. "Bryony's thorough." He nodded, didn't ask who Bryony was, didn't ask what she was being thorough about, poured a second glass and slid it across the counter like the answer was wine and the question didn't matter. I took the glass. I sat across from my husband in a kitchen that belonged to his father, inside a house that belonged to his family, drinking wine paid for by an empire built before I was born, and I thought about 16 documents on a glass table 12 miles away, 15 of them stamped with a version of me that didn't need to be in the room. I didn't tell Stellan, not that night. I told myself I was waiting for Bryony's analysis, that I needed facts before accusations, that I owed the family due diligence before suspicion. But that wasn't it, really. I didn't tell him because I was afraid, not of what he'd say, but of what his face would do, whether I'd see surprise or whether I'd see something worse. Recognition. I barely slept. The kitchen counter where Stellan had slid that wine glass, I kept seeing it. The ease of the gesture, the way he didn't ask who Bryony was or what she was being thorough about. Either he trusted me completely, or He already knew. Saturday morning, my phone lit up at 7:12. Bryony, I need you in the office. The 4 documents, I've identified them, and this changes your exposure. She didn't say the case or the investigation. She said your exposure. I got dressed. Same charcoal trousers, fresh ivory blouse, no blazer. The armor felt pointless now. And drove 12 miles in a silence that weighed more than any conversation I'd had in 6 years of marriage. Bryony's office. Same glass walls, same cool white light, same pen in her right hand, but the pen wasn't moving. It was flat on the table beside her legal pad, and I'd learned enough in 3 days to know what that meant. 4 documents, separated from the rest, laid in a row on the far end of the conference table, away from the 11 transfers, as if contamination was the concern. These aren't transfers, they're NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. She let that land. Then she walked me through them. Clinical, precise. 4 names, 4 people I had never met. The first 2 were former employees, terminated from a Southcott entity under disputed circumstances. Wrongful termination claims, both settled quietly. The NDAs ensured their silence. My signature was on the settlement authorization and the non-disclosure provision. I was listed as the family representative who agreed to the terms. The third was a contractor, a firm that had done renovation work on one of the family's commercial properties. They'd been shorted $180,000. The NDA prevented them from discussing the dispute publicly. My name, again, as the family signatory who'd approved the settlement and the silence. The fourth was a whistleblower, someone inside one of the family entities who had attempted to report financial irregularities, the same kind of irregularities that were now sitting on Bryony's conference table in the form of 11 forged transfer authorizations. That person had been offered a settlement and required to sign an NDA. The person who authorized that silencing, the person whose name was on the agreement that told a whistleblower to stop talking, was me. I stared at the fourth document, my signature at the bottom, my name in the authorization block, my title, Signatory Southcott Family Trust, printed beneath a mark I'd never made. If any of these 4 individuals challenge the NDAs, Bryony said, her voice level, the pen still flat, you are the named enforcing party, not the trust, not Hadrian Southcott. You. You will be the person who has to answer for why they were silenced. I hadn't just been bypassed, I'd been loaded like a weapon and pointed at people I'd never met. And then, sitting in that glass office, staring at the name of a whistleblower I'd apparently silenced, a memory surfaced. Not because I called it, because the documents called it. A dinner, roughly a year ago. The long mahogany table at the estate, the one that seats 14 but usually held 3. Hadrian at the head, glass of red wine tilted but never spilled, the way only people who've been wealthy for decades hold stemware. Stellan to his right, me across from Stellan. Hadrian had been in a generous mood that evening, telling stories about the early years of the empire, the first property deal, the first million, the first time a banker called him instead of the other way around. I'd listened the way I always listened to Hadrian's stories, carefully, gratefully, like each one was a door being held open. Then he said it, offhand, between courses, the way you mention something so ordinary you barely hear yourself say it. The office handles sensitive matters discreetly. That's how things work at this level. I nodded. I thought he was including me in operational confidence, trusting me with the architecture of how powerful families manage difficult situations, the quiet settlements, the private agreements, the things you don't discuss outside the dining room. I felt elevated. I felt like he was showing me the machinery because I was finally close enough to be trusted with it. He was telling me, across that table, with wine in his hand and candlelight on the portraits behind him, that people were being silenced, and my name was on the paperwork that made it legal. I'd nodded, I'd smiled, I felt included. 4 strangers had been told to stop talking, and my signature was the lock on their mouths. The man who built the machine had told me exactly what it did, and I'd thanked him for the trust. Bryony started building the case that morning, retained a forensic document examiner. She'd need signature analysis, ink pressure comparison, the kind of testimony that holds in court. She told me the process would take days. I should have gone home, should have waited for the science, the expert report, the chain of evidence Bryony was constructing with the precision of a woman who wins cases by never leaving a gap for the other side to walk through. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath her building, and my brain did something I couldn't stop. It started replaying moments. Not the big ones, not Hadrian's dinner comment or the day I was appointed signatory. Small ones, hallway moments, office kitchen conversations, the kind of interactions you forget by lunch. One stayed. Roughly 18 months ago, a Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, the kind of day that doesn't announce itself. I was walking through the family office after a meeting. One of the administrators, I didn't know her name well, she handled document processing and filing, smiled at me in the hallway. Warm smile, genuine. She said, "Your authorizations always process so quickly, Mrs. Southcott." I smiled back, took it the way you take a compliment from a colleague, as confirmation that you're doing your job well, that the work matters, that you belong in the role. I probably said thank you. I probably walked a little taller for the next hour. 18 months later, in a concrete parking garage with my hands on the steering wheel and 4 NDA names in my head, the compliment rebuilt itself. The authorizations were fast because they were never waiting for me. They were approved before I knew they existed. She wasn't complimenting my efficiency. She was observing the output of a system she didn't know was running, one that produced my consent like office supplies. The compliment was an accidental confession from a woman who had no idea what she was revealing. I called Bryony from the car. "I need to go to the estate, Hadrian's private office." A beat. I heard her pen tap once. "You have access?" "I'm signatory on every entity that operates out of that office. I have legal standing to inspect any workspace tied to those entities." "Have you ever been inside his private office?" "No." Another beat. Then, "Photograph everything. Touch as little as possible. If you find a device, a stamp, a press, anything that could produce a signature, photograph it in place before you move it. Do not take anything. Chain of custody." She paused. "And Astra, if what you find is what I think you'll find, you're going to want to touch it, pick it up, hold it. Don't. Photograph it where it sits. We need the location as much as the object." I drove toward the estate, 12 miles of well-paved road, the kind of road billionaire estates are built at the end of, designed to make the arrival feel earned, the distance deliberate. I drove it in 14 minutes and noticed every second. Stellan's car wasn't in the drive. Saturday morning, he played tennis at the club most Saturdays. Hadrian's car was also absent. The house was empty. I let myself in through the family office entrance, the wing I'd worked in for 3 years, past the common workspaces, past my own desk, a cup of pens still there, a framed photo of Stellan and me from a charity gala 2 years ago where I'd worn a midnight blue gown and he'd told me I looked like someone who'd been born into this world. I'd taken it as the highest compliment. Now I walked past it without stopping. The corridor narrowed, the common office ended, and at the end, a heavy oak door, brass handle, no lock on the outside, no sign, no need. Everyone who worked in the family office knew this was Hadrian's private office. The boundary was understood, not enforced, just understood. In 6 years of marriage and 3 years of working 20 feet from this door, I had never opened it. There had never been a reason. There was one now. I opened the door. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Old leather, brass polish, the faint sweetness of wood oiled for decades, maintenance that costs more than the furniture itself, because in this family, upkeep is how you prove you understand what you own. Hadrian's private office. I'd imagined it smaller. A desk, some files, maybe a bookshelf. I'd imagined the private office of a man who ran things from meetings and phone calls, a functional room, not a ceremonial one. I was wrong. Floor-to-ceiling dark walnut paneling, a Persian rug, deep burgundy and navy, laid across herringbone hardwood that gleamed where the rug didn't cover it. A heavy leather chair behind a desk that could have been an antique or could have been built to look like one. With Hadrian, both were equally likely. Brass desk lamp pooling amber light, even though the room was empty. Someone had left it on, or it was always on, a permanent flame in a permanent room. And the portraits. 3 of them, directly behind the desk mounted on the paneled wall, each in a heavy gilt frame. 3 generations of Sothcott men. The oldest, sepia-toned, stiff collar, the expression of a man who built the first brick. Next to him, a younger face with similar bones, the second generation, the expander. And in the center, slightly larger than the others, Hadrian. Steel blue eyes, even in oil paint, silver hair, the 3-piece charcoal suit. The expression I'd seen across 1,000 dinner tables, composed authority that never asked permission and never expected to. 3 men on a wall, the lineage of the empire. No women, no in-laws, no newcomers. I stood in front of those portraits longer than I should have. Bryony had said, photograph everything, touch nothing. But I wasn't photographing yet. I was looking for a face that looked like mine. There wasn't one. The desk. I moved to it the way Bryony would, systematically. 4 drawers on the right side. I tried the top 3. They opened freely. Files organized by entity name, stationery, heavyweight bond, the same paper stock as the forged documents, reading glasses in a brass tray, a fountain pen, uncapped as if he'd stepped away mid-thought and would return any moment. The 4th drawer. Locked. My hand went to the brass tray. Reading glasses, the fountain pen, a small brass key I'd have missed if I weren't looking for exactly this. It sat between the glasses and the pen like it had been there for years, which it had. He'd never needed to hide it seriously. The key to the drawer that held the device that produced my consent was sitting on the desk in plain sight because he never expected me to be in this room. The security wasn't mechanical, it was social. I'd never opened this door because the boundary was understood, and understood boundaries are the cheapest locks in the world. They cost nothing to maintain and they hold until the moment someone decides they shouldn't. I turned the key. The drawer opened. Inside, a small metal device, silver gray, rectangular, roughly the size of a deck of cards. I almost didn't recognize it. I'd been imagining something large, industrial, complex, a machine, something that required effort to operate. This was a stamp, an office stamp, the kind you can buy at any business supply store for $30, except this one wasn't bought. This one was made. I picked it up. Bryony told me not to. She said photograph it in place, but my hand was reaching before my brain could intervene, and by the time I thought about chain of custody, the device was in my palm. On the underside, my signature, carved into rubber, every loop of the A, every slant, the deliberate upward drag on the T, the flourish I'd trained into my handwriting when I decided I wasn't going to be the daughter-in-law who signed small. All of it, rendered in reverse, cut into rubber, mounted on metal, ready to produce my consent on any surface, at any time, without my hand, without my knowledge, without me. It weighed almost nothing. 3 years, $38 million, 4 silenced strangers, 15 documents, my entire tenure as a signatory, every authorization, every approval, every act of consent that was supposed to mean I was present and informed and part of this family's operations, all of it produced by a device that fit in my palm and weighed less than my phone. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the money, not the NDAs, not the scale. The weight. How little it took to replace me. How small the machine was that made me unnecessary. You'd think being erased would require something substantial, some enormous effort, some complex operation. It didn't. It required a piece of rubber and a man who never considered my presence worth the inconvenience of asking. Beside the stamp, a leather-bound ledger. I set the stamp down, on the desk, not back in the drawer, I couldn't put it back, and opened the ledger. Handwritten entries, Hadrian's careful, precise script, the handwriting of a man who has kept records his entire life because precision isn't a habit for him, it's an identity. Columns, dates, entity names, transfer amounts, and in the rightmost column beside every entry, 2 initials. H.S. Hadrian Southcott. 16 entries, 3 years, his initials beside every one. He'd recorded his own fraud the way he recorded everything else, meticulously, completely, with the discipline of a man who trusts his own systems more than he trusts anyone in them. I photographed the stamp from 4 angles, every page of the ledger, the open drawer, the brass tray with the key sitting where it had always sat, the room, the portraits, the desk, the lamp still burning. I took 37 photographs. I touched the stamp once. Everything else I left in place. I closed the drawer, pocketed the key, then put it back. Bryony's voice in my head, chain of custody. I left the key in the brass tray where Hadrian had left it for 3 years. I walked out of his office, closed the heavy oak door behind me, walked past my own desk, the pens, the framed photo, walked past the common workspaces where an administrator had once complimented how quickly my authorizations processed, walked out of the family office wing into the corridor with the portraits on both walls, more Southcotts watching from more frames, and out through the estate entrance into daylight that felt too bright for what I was carrying. I sat in my car, opened the phone, scrolled to the photograph of the stamp, my signature, carved in rubber, sitting in my palm. And I thought, does Stella know? Not did Stella know, does. He, present tense, is he knowing right now, this Saturday morning, on a tennis court somewhere, that his father built a device to manufacture his wife's consent? Is he hitting a backhand while my name sits in a drawer? Has he always known? Did he find out and decide that not knowing was easier than knowing? Did he look at that stamp and think, this is fine? Or did he never look at all, which might be worse? I put the phone down, started the car. I had the proof, the who, the how, the mechanism and the maker. What I didn't have, what no photograph could give me, was whether my husband let it happen. That question was for a different room, a different conversation, and I wasn't ready for it yet. Sunday was the longest day of my life. I spent it in the estate, in the kitchen, in our bedroom, in the garden, carrying 37 photographs on a phone I couldn't stop checking and a question I couldn't ask. Stellan came home from tennis. We had dinner. He talked about the club, about a doubles match, about whether we should refinish the terrace furniture. I said the right words. I ate. I drank wine from a glass he poured. I slept next to a man whose face I was afraid to read. Monday morning, Bryony's office. The forensic document examiner, a woman in her 50s, steel gray hair pinned back, no jewelry except a thin wedding band. Her authority, built entirely on precision, had set up a large screen on the conference table. She didn't introduce herself with credentials. She went straight to the work. On the screen, 6 of the 15 forged signatures, digitally overlaid. She layered them one on top of another, and they aligned, not approximately, not closely. They sat on top of each other the way a page sits on its own photocopy. Every stroke identical, every curve locked into the same path. Her explanation was clinical, short sentences, no wasted words. A human hand always varies. Pressure shifts between strokes. Microtremors affect line width. Letter spacing changes with speed, fatigue, mood. Even a person signing their own name, the same name they've signed 10,000 times, will produce measurable variation, always. She tapped the screen. The 6 overlaid signatures glowed. These 15 signatures show 0 variation, identical ink pressure, identical stroke width, identical slant, identical spacing. No human hand produced these marks. 0 variation, not low variation, not minimal, 0. The number that means a machine did this, a device, a stamp pressed onto paper 15 times across 3 years, and each impression was identical because rubber doesn't have tremors, doesn't get tired, doesn't change its mind. Bryony's pen was on the table. The examiner's work was done. The chain was complete. 16 documents pulled, 15 forged, the stamp photographed in Hadrian's locked drawer, the ledger HS beside every entry, and now scientific confirmation that no human hand made the marks, mechanical reproduction, consistent with a rubber stamp device. Bryony began drafting the emergency court filing while I sat at the conference table with my phone and did the thing I'd been avoiding since Saturday. I opened the photographs of the ledger, 16 entries in Hadrian's careful handwriting, dates, entity names, amounts, HS. I'd seen them in the office, but I hadn't studied them. Now I did. I matched dates to my own calendar. Not all of them, I couldn't remember 3 years of Tuesdays, but clusters, patterns, and one pattern stopped me. 5 entries in a 6-month window, roughly 18 months ago, a spike. More stamp usage in 6 months than in any comparable period. I cross-referenced with my own memory and my calendar and the emails I'd saved, invitations, messages, the ordinary digital trail of a family life. That 6-month period, 18 months ago, Hadrian had been warm, not his usual reserve, actual warmth. He'd invited me to family dinners more frequently, complimented my quarterly report on the real estate portfolio, said it was thorough, that he appreciated the detail. He organized a birthday gathering for me. Cake, flowers, the whole family present. Stellan had been surprised. He told me later that his father hadn't organized a birthday for anyone since his mother died. I'd felt during those months that I'd finally broken through, that the old man's walls were coming down, that years of deference and hard work and showing up and trying were finally landing. I told Stellan, sitting in this estate, in this kitchen with this wine, that I thought his father was finally letting me in. The warmth coincided with the spike. 5 entries in 6 months. The stamp was working perfectly. Authorizations were flowing. The bypass was invisible. And because it was working, because my presence was no longer a bottleneck, he could afford to be kind. He wasn't letting me in. He was celebrating that he'd successfully locked me out. The kindness was operational. I was being managed, not loved. And I'd thanked him for it. I felt grateful. That's the one I can't forgive. Not the stamp, not the money, not even the NDAs. The warmth, the manufactured warmth that made me believe I was finally family, timed to the exact period when he'd made me most irrelevant. That's the cruelty I'll carry, because I didn't just fall for it. I was happy. Tuesday.
1 week since the trustee called. I went to Stellan first, not Hadrian. I told myself it was because the husband deserved to hear it before the patriarch. The truth was simpler. Stellan was the easier question. I already knew what Hadrian would say. He'd justify it. He'd frame it as institutional. He'd never apologize because in his architecture, there was nothing to apologize for. Stellan was the question I didn't know the answer to, and I needed to see his face before I could walk into his father's office. Our private quarters, evening, the room we'd shared for 6 years, high ceilings, pale linen curtains, a king bed we'd picked out together from a catalog that priced everything in the thousands. Beautiful furniture in a borrowed house. I'd hung 2 paintings I loved on the far wall, the only things in the room that were mine and not the family's. I looked at them now and thought even the nails were his. Stellan was sitting on the edge of the bed, white shirt, untucked, sleeves rolled to the forearms, the end-of-day version of a man who dressed like his father but wore the clothes looser. No jacket, no watch. He looked younger without the armor. He looked like the man I'd married. I didn't ask him. I didn't give him the shape of a question he could deflect. Did you know? Were you aware? Had you heard? Questions have exits. I closed them all. I stated, I found a stamp in your father's desk, my signature carved into rubber. There's a ledger beside it, 16 entries, 3 years, his initials on every one. $38 million in unauthorized transfers, 4 NDAs silencing people I've never met. A forensic examiner confirmed yesterday every signature is mechanically identical, 0 variation, no human hand. I delivered it the way Bryony would, facts in sequence, no emotion offered for him to manage. I watched his face the way I'd been afraid to watch it since last Tuesday. His face didn't do surprise. I'd been afraid of that. I'd been afraid his eyebrows wouldn't rise, his mouth wouldn't open, his body wouldn't do the involuntary things a body does when it encounters information for the first time. It didn't. His jaw tightened, his eyes went to the lower left, that micro shift he does when he's about to say something he doesn't want to say. His right hand went to his hair, and his lips pressed together for a fraction of a second before he spoke. Recognition, not surprise. Recognition. His words, when they came, were quiet, almost mumbled, the voice of a man who'd rehearsed this moment in the shower and still couldn't get it right. Tight voice. I didn't think he'd actually use it. 7 words, and every one a confession. He knew. Not the details, maybe not the NDAs, maybe not the dollar amount, maybe not the ledger with the meticulous initials, but the stamp, the device, the mechanism. He knew or suspected with enough clarity that the word suspected is just new wearing a better suit. He'd applied the survival strategy his father built into him across 35 years. Don't ask, don't challenge, don't look directly at the thing and it stays manageable. The same strategy that made him a mid-level presence in his family's own empire. The same strategy that let him pour wine on a Friday evening and not ask his wife who Bryony was. The same strategy that let him sleep beside a woman whose identity was being manufactured in a drawer 20 feet from their bedroom. He chose comfort. He chose the architecture. He chose his father's system over his wife's consent, not with malice, not with cruelty, but with the thing that costs exactly the same, silence. I looked at him. Sitting on our bed, white shirt, no armor, looking younger than 35 and smaller than any room he'd ever been in. I wanted to hate him. I wanted the clean energy of rage, the kind that lets you slam doors and throw things and be done. What I had was worse. I had pity and exhaustion and 4 words. You didn't stop him. Not screaming, not a question. A verdict delivered at speaking volume in a room with pale linen curtains and 2 paintings that were mine and nothing else. He stood up, started toward me. His mouth opened, another half-sentence forming, another thought he'd never finish. I thought maybe... I closed the door. On the other side, nothing. No knock, no footsteps following, just the silence of a man standing alone in a room he inherited, wearing the consequences of a choice he'd made by not making one. I walked down the corridor, past the portraits, past the sconces, past every piece of architecture that belonged to the man I was going to see tomorrow. I walked slowly, not because I was uncertain, because I was done hurrying for this family.
Wednesday, day 9. I dressed for it. Navy blazer, charcoal trousers, ivory blouse buttoned one higher than usual. Hair down. I'd considered pulling it back, considered looking more professional, more armored, but I wasn't performing for him anymore. I was done performing for this family. I wore my hair the way I wear it. I wore my face the way it looked after 2 hours of sleep and a marriage that ended with a door click. I drove to the estate, let myself into the family office wing, walked the corridor, same portraits, same sconces, same herringbone under my flats. But I didn't look at the portraits this time. I'd already had that conversation with them. 3 generations, no women. Message received. The heavy oak door at the end of the corridor, brass handle, the door I'd never opened until 4 days ago, the door I'd opened to find a stamp and a ledger and the physical proof that my consent had been manufactured for 3 years. I knocked. First time I'd ever knocked on this door. 4 days ago, I'd walked in because the house was empty. Today, he was inside. I could hear the brass lamp humming, or maybe I imagined it. Maybe I just knew it was on because it was always on. His voice. One word. Come. Not come in, just come. The economy of a man who has never used 2 words when one would do. I opened the door. Same room. Same walnut paneling, same Persian rug, same portraits, 3 men watching from the wall, the center one watching with painted steel blue eyes that matched the live ones behind the desk, same brass lamp pooling amber, same heavy leather chair. Hadrian sat behind his desk, charcoal 3-piece suit, white shirt, dark navy tie, white pocket square in presidential fold. Hands flat on the desk surface, palms down, fingers spread, the posture of a man who owns every surface he touches. He didn't stand when I entered. He didn't greet me. He watched me the way the portraits watched me, with assessment, not welcome. The 4th drawer was closed. I didn't look at it. He didn't look at it. We both knew it was empty. I placed the evidence on his desk, methodically, the way he would, the way I'd learned by watching him run things for 6 years. First, the photographs of the stamp, 4 angles, the signature carved into rubber, clearly legible. His desk, his drawer, his office. Second, printouts of the ledger pages, 16 entries, dates, entities, amounts, and in the rightmost column, HS. His handwriting, his initials, his meticulous record. Third, the forensic report. 0 variation, mechanical reproduction confirmed. The expert's conclusion printed in clinical language that said what I'd known since I held the device in my palm. No human hand made these marks. I placed each item in front of him the way Bryony would present exhibits in court, because tomorrow she would. Hadrian looked at the photographs, the printouts, the report. He didn't pick any of them up. His hand stayed flat on the desk. His expression didn't change. Or if it did, the change was so small that 35 years of controlling rooms had made it invisible. Then he looked at me. He didn't deny. I'd been bracing for legal language. I'll need to speak with counsel, something that acknowledged the machinery between us. No apology, but I hadn't expected one.
An apology would require him to believe he'd done something wrong. The man behind that desk had built every entity, signed every original document, designed every structure that now bore my forged authorization. He did not believe he'd done something wrong. He explained, not to me, to himself, to the portraits, to the room that had held his stamp for 3 years without judgment. His voice was low, measured, the baritone that fills rooms without rising. He spoke like each word was selected from a shorter list than other people use. The signatory requirement was imposed by lawyers, compliance restructuring, estate planning regulations, a legal formality, not an operational necessity. The transfers were distributions he'd been making for decades, routine, institutional, the same movements of money through the same channels that had existed before I entered the picture. The stamp removed a bottleneck, an administrative bottleneck. He was running his empire the way he'd always run it, and the law had inserted a step that served no operational purpose. He said this calmly, precisely, with the conviction of a man who had justified this action to himself so thoroughly that the justification became fact. And then he said the line. He looked at me, not through me, not past me, at me. And his voice didn't change, same register, same measured cadence, same baritone that told stories at dinner tables and issued instructions in boardrooms and said, "Welcome to the family's work," 3 years ago in this very room. You think signing papers makes you part of this family?
10 words, and every one of them had been true for 6 years. He'd never said them before, not because he'd been hiding them, but because he'd never considered me important enough to need to hear them. The stamp wasn't a secret from me. It was a system that didn't involve me. The same way the portraits on the wall didn't involve me. The same way the empire didn't involve me. The same way the family, his architecture, his lineage, didn't involve me. I'd spent 6 years trying to earn something he'd never offered. The signatory role, the desk, the office, the invitations, the birthday party with cake and flowers, all of it. Every piece of access, every gesture of inclusion was management, compliance theater performed by a man who viewed my presence as a legal requirement and my absence as the natural state. I looked at the portraits behind him. 3 generations of Southcotts, men who built, men who owned, men who hung themselves on walls and expected the walls to hold. I wasn't in any of them. I never would be. I looked back at Hadrian. His hands were still flat on the desk. His eyes were still on me. He was waiting, not for my response, but for my departure. The conversation in his mind was finished. He'd explained. The explanation was complete. What remained was for me to accept it or not, and either way, the architecture would continue. I didn't answer the line. Not because I didn't have words, because no words I could say in that room would change the walls, the portraits, the desk, the drawer, the lamp, or the man behind them. He'd built everything, including the machine that replaced me. And he'd keep building after I left. I held his gaze for 3 seconds. Not defiant, not broken, present. The one thing the stamp couldn't manufacture, my actual presence, my actual eyes, my actual self, standing in his room, looking at him with the full knowledge of what he'd done and who he was. Then I turned, walked to the door, opened it, stepped through. The door closed behind me. Same corridor, same portraits, same sconces casting amber pools on herringbone hardwood. But I was different. I was a woman who had asked 6 years of questions and received a 10-word answer. And the answer was, you were never here. Thursday, day 10. I chose the navy dress, high neckline, knee length, structured enough that I wouldn't have to think about it again once I put it on. Matching blazer, hair down. I looked in the mirror in a room I'd slept in for 6 years, inside a house that had never been mine, and noticed the wedding ring still on my finger. I thought about taking it off. I left it. That decision belonged to a different day. Today was for the record. Bryony was already at the courthouse. Black suit, white collar, hair pulled back, pen nowhere in sight, which meant she was done preparing. Everything she needed was in the evidence binders and on the screen. She looked at me once, nodded. Not reassurance, acknowledgement. The courtroom didn't care about any of us. High ceilings, not like the estates. These weren't designed to impress. Flat light. No amber, no brass, no portraits, just institutional neutrality, the scratch of a clerk's pen, and an echo that said one thing: the state was here before your empire. It will be here after. Hadrian sat across the aisle. Charcoal three-piece, white pocket square, hands flat on the table in front of him. Same position as his desk, same stillness. He brought his office posture into a room he didn't build, and for the first time, it didn't fill the space. The ceilings were higher than his. His counsel went first. I listened to my father-in-law's worldview translated into case law, administrative convenience. The signatory requirement was a compliance formality imposed by estate planning attorneys. The distributions were routine, the same movements of capital the patriarch had been executing for decades. The stamp was a practical solution to a procedural bottleneck. I'd heard this argument before, in his office, in his voice, in the 10 words he'd said to my face the day before. Now I was hearing it in legalese, and it sounded exactly the same. Smaller words, same meaning. She was a formality. We worked around her. Bryony stood. She didn't raise her voice. She laid the evidence the way she handled documents, at the edges, precisely, letting each piece speak. 16 documents, chronological, 1 genuine, the original I'd signed 3 years ago, 15 forged. The stamp. She held it up for the court. Small, metal, my signature carved into rubber. The judge looked at it, and I watched that pause happen again, the one I'd felt in Hadrian's office, the recognition that 3 years of fraud fits in one hand. The ledger, Hadrian's initials, HS beside every entry, his own handwriting, 16 times, 3 years. She turned each photographed page on the screen. The forensic report, 0 variation, identical pressure across all 15 signatures, no human hand. She let the last slide hold, then she sat down. The judge ruled. Distributions voided. All 11 financial transfers pending full forensic accounting and investigation. NDAs invalidated, all 4. The contractor who'd been shorted $180,000, the 2 employees terminated under disputed terms, the whistleblower who tried to report the same irregularities now displayed on the courtroom screen, free to speak, all of them. The mouths my forged name had sealed were open. Criminal referral for forgery and fraud. I watched Hadrian, his hands lifted from the table. Not much, an inch, but they lifted. His fingers interlaced, palms no longer flat, no longer claiming the surface beneath them. I'd sat across from this man at 100 dinners and never once seen his hands do something he didn't choose. They interlaced now the way hands do when the body knows something the mind hasn't accepted. His jaw flexed. His gaze dropped to some middle distance where men who built everything go when the thing they built is being taken apart by a system they don't control. I won. Everything I'd set out to prove, proven. Every forged document, voided. Every silenced person, freed. The system confirmed what I'd found in a locked drawer on a Saturday afternoon. Forgery is forgery. A stamp is not a signature. Administrative convenience is not a defense. But the court couldn't rule on the thing that actually mattered. No judge can void the moment a family decides you don't belong. No forensic examiner can measure when warmth became operational. Was the law protecting me, or did it build the exact gap he walked through? I drove back to the estate one last time. I walked through the house without packing, without a speech, the way you walk through a place you're memorizing because you know you won't come back. Past the family office wing, past my desk, the cup of pins still there, the framed photo from the gala where Stellan told me I look like someone born into this world. I left it on the desk. It belonged to the woman who believed him. Past Hadrian's door, closed, brass handle catching hallway light. The lamp was probably still burning inside. It was always burning. Past the corridor, the portraits on both walls, 3 generations of Southcotts watching me leave the way they'd watched me arrive 6 years ago. I didn't stop. I didn't need to look at them again. I knew the answer. I'd always known the answer, somewhere beneath the trying. I walked out the front entrance, got into a car, closed the door. The estate filled the rear window. Dark wood, tall windows, grounds that cost more to maintain than most people earn in a year. The house I'd called home, getting smaller. I held nothing in my hands, not the stamp, that was evidence now, tagged and filed, not the ledger, Exhibit B, not the marriage, that ended with a door click and 4 words 2 nights ago, not the belonging. That was never mine to hold. What I wanted wasn't in a drawer. It wasn't on any page or in any ruling. It was simpler than all of it. It was in how they looked at me. And they never did, not the way I needed them to. That's the cost. Not the fraud, not the 38 million, not the 4 strangers silenced in my name. The ease, how quietly they worked without me, how small the device was, how little it weighed. I didn't look back again. The road stretched ahead, long, empty, well-maintained. I'd driven it 14 minutes to get here 10 days ago. I drove it forward now, towards something smaller. I drove it forward this time, towards something smaller, without portraits on the walls or a drawer with my name inside it. Something mine. It's been 4 days since the courtroom. I'm in a rental. 2 bedrooms, 1 more than I need, 3 fewer than I'm used to. Street level, kitchen counter that fits 1 person, ceilings at 8 feet. The walls are white, nothing on them. People have asked what I won. The legal answer is clean. 15 voided documents, 4 people freed from silence, a criminal referral, my name removed from agreements I never made. On paper, I recovered everything that was taken. But belonging isn't on paper. That's the thing no court can award and no forgery can explain. You can't subpoena the moment a family decides you're a formality. You can't void the day they stopped seeing you and started working around you. Hadrian built a stamp because the drawer was there and the boundary was social, and I respected it. I respected it because I thought that was how you earned a place inside a family you married into. He counted on that for 3 years. 16 documents bore my signature. I signed 1. The rest were rubber on paper, a device that weighed almost nothing, producing consent I never gave. And the hardest part wasn't the scale, it was the ease, how quietly they worked without me, how little it cost them to make me unnecessary. If they could replace my signature with a stamp, was I ever really there? I don't know. I may never know. And I think that's the wound that stays, not the answer, the question. I'm signing a lease tomorrow. My hand, my pen, my name on a line I chose. No portraits of Southcotts on the walls, no drawer with my identity inside. Smaller. Mine. I'll know I signed it, because I'll feel the pin.
This is American Billionaire Tales, where fortune meets fate. Some names were never meant to be carved into rubber. If something in this story stayed, the stamp, the warmth, the 10 words he said in that office, leave it in the comments, share it with someone who should hear it, and subscribe. This isn't the last family with a locked drawer.